He rose as a hero, cheered by a hopeful nation, but behind the uniform was something else. This is the haunting story of Idi Amin's rise and tragic fall, a tale of dreams betrayed and a country that still carries the wounds. This is African Dream Motivation. Stay tuned and let's begin.
Idi Amin Dada Umi was born in the mid-1920s in Koboko, a town in northwestern Uganda. He had very limited formal schooling and spent his youth doing odd jobs. In 1946, Amin enlisted in the British Colonial Army, the King's African Rifles, initially as an assistant cook. Despite humble beginnings, he proved to be physically formidable and resilient. Amin quickly rose through the ranks, serving in British military operations such as the suppression of the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. He was one of the few indigenous Ugandan soldiers to be promoted to officer rank before Uganda's independence. Amin also gained local fame for his athletic prowess. He was Uganda's light heavyweight boxing champion. After Uganda gained independence from Britain in 1962, Amin became closely aligned with the new Prime Minister, Milton Obote. By 1965 to 1966, Amin had been appointed commander of the Ugandan Army and Air Force. In 1966, Amin led an attack on the Kabaka's palace that forced the monarch into exile. In 1965, he was implicated in a smuggling scandal involving gold and ivory. By the late 1960s, Idi Amin was the second most powerful man in Uganda. By 1970, relations between Idi Amin and President Milton Obote had deteriorated badly. Obote was wary of Amin's growing influence in the army and suspicious of financial improprieties. In October 1970, Obote removed Amin from overall command and relegated him to army commander. Fearing that Obote was preparing to arrest him, Idi Amin struck first. On January 25, 1971, while Obote was abroad, Amin launched a military coup d'etat. Army units loyal to him occupied strategic sites. They sealed off Entebbe airport and took over Kampala. A radio broadcast announced that the army had taken power, accusing Obote's regime of corruption. Crowds in Kampala reportedly cheered the coup announcement. He pledged to release political prisoners and hold free elections once stability was restored. Many Ugandans initially welcomed Amin's takeover as a fresh start. Amin organized a state funeral for the exiled former King Mutesa II in April 1971. Within a week, Idi Amin declared himself president of Uganda.
I have only come here for 5 minutes. I have come as a president of the Republic of Uganda, and also I am speaking as a great man who is the conqueror of the British Empire.
Obote fled to neighboring Tanzania, where President Julius Nyerere granted him asylum. Uganda had entered a new era of military dictatorship. Once in power, Idi Amin established an authoritarian military government and began issuing decrees to reshape Uganda's politics and society. He suspended key provisions of the 1967 constitution, abolished civilian democratic institutions, and ruled by decree, ultimately issuing around 30 decrees during his 8-year reign. Amin formed an advisory defense council of military officers with himself as chairman to rubber stamp his decisions. He promoted himself to the rank of field marshal in 1975 and in 1976 bestowed upon himself the title of President for Life, signaling his intention never to relinquish power. Major government ministries and state-owned companies were handed to army officers and Amin loyalists, blurring the line between the military and civil authority. He renamed the presidential residence the command post and cultivated an image as a military man above all else. Under Amin's regime, military tribunals were placed above civilian law courts, and soldiers who pledged personal allegiance to Amin enjoyed complete impunity. One of Amin's most impactful and infamous policies was his so-called economic war against the Asian population of Uganda. In August 1972, Amin abruptly ordered the expulsion of Uganda's Asian minority, who were mostly of Indian and Pakistani descent. He gave them 90 days to leave the country, accusing them of sabotaging Uganda's economy and calling them economic bloodsuckers in a venomous speech. This drastic move resulted in approximately 50,000 to 70,000 South Asians being forced out of Uganda. Many of these families had lived in Uganda for generations and ran a large share of the commerce and industry. The expulsion had devastating economic consequences. With the Asian community gone, businesses were handed over to Amin's inexperienced supporters or simply abandoned, leading to a collapse in commerce. Uganda's economy, which had been one of the strongest in East Africa, swiftly deteriorated. Production plummeted, inflation soared, and shortages of basic goods became widespread. Amin's response was to tighten military control and print money to fund the army and his patronage network, which only worsened the economic chaos. During his rule, Idi Amin's governing style mixed flamboyance with fear. He often projected a quirky, larger-than-life persona on the international stage, appearing in elaborate military uniforms bedecked with self-awarded medals and even giving himself grandiose titles. At various times, he styled himself as conqueror of the British Empire and the uncrowned King of Scotland, reveling in mocking former colonial powers. Domestically, however, he maintained control through intimidation and brutality. Amin ruled directly and impulsively, his moods swinging from genial to ferocious. Government meetings and radio broadcasts were sometimes peppered with his eccentric or chilling pronouncements. He is famously quoted as saying, "There is freedom of speech, but I cannot guarantee freedom after speech," encapsulating the atmosphere of repression under his regime. Indeed, Uganda under Amin became a police state. He established the State Research Bureau, a secret police and intelligence agency, which along with the military police and a newly formed public safety unit, terrorized the populace with arbitrary arrests, torture and executions. The SRB's headquarters in Kampala became notorious for being a torture chamber from which many never emerged alive. Amin's inner circle benefited from his rule through patronage and plunder. He redistributed properties and assets such as homes and shops confiscated from expelled Asians to his senior officers to ensure their continued loyalty. Meanwhile, basic state functions like education, healthcare, and infrastructure languished as resources were diverted to the military and to Amin's lavish indulgences. From the outset, Idi Amin's regime was characterized by extreme violence and human rights abuses. He ruthlessly eliminated anyone he perceived as a threat. In the weeks after the 1971 coup, soldiers loyal to Amin carried out mass killings of troops from the Acholi and Lango ethnic groups, which had been the backbone of Obote's army. Entire barracks were massacred. For example, in July 1971, dozens of Acholi and Lango soldiers were killed at Jinja and Mbarara barracks. This ethnic purge soon extended to civilians as well. By early 1972, an estimated 5,000 soldiers from those groups had been murdered or disappeared, along with perhaps twice as many civilian relatives. In subsequent years, the list of Amin's victims grew to include people from all walks of life: academics, journalists, doctors, judges, university rectors, religious leaders, and even members of Amin's own cabinet. Notable figures who were murdered during his rule included Benedicto Kiwanuka, the former Chief Justice and Prime Minister, Janani Lubum, the Anglican Archbishop of Uganda, and the Central Bank Governor Joseph Mubiru. Two of Amin's cabinet ministers, Erinayo Oriema and Charles Oboth Ofumbi, were killed after they objected to the regime's excesses. Fear permeated every level of society, as people could be detained and executed on the flimsiest suspicion of disloyalty or no cause at all. Bodies of victims often turned up in the River Nile or were left in the streets as a grotesque warning to others. Amin's reign of terror resulted in a death toll that is difficult to quantify, but staggering in scale. International human rights observers estimate that no fewer than 100,000 Ugandans, and perhaps as many as 300,000 to 500,000 were killed under Amin's orders or in state-sponsored violence from 1971 to 1979. Many others were brutally tortured, maimed, or driven into exile. Whole ethnic communities, aside from Asians who were expelled, suffered persecution. Amin particularly targeted the Acholi and Lango peoples, whom he felt were loyal to Obote, but other groups like the Kakwa rival clans, as well as professionals and intellectuals regardless of ethnicity, fell victim to the bloodletting. Methods of killing were often horrific. Witness accounts and defectors from Amin's regime described execution squads that beheaded prominent opponents, storing the severed heads in freezers for Amin to inspect. It was reported that bodies were dumped into the Nile River in such numbers that crocodiles became fat from feeding on the corpses. Some of Amin's acts were so outlandish and cruel that they spawned lurid rumors. For instance, Amin was alleged to practice cannibalism. One former minister, Henry Kemba, wrote that Amin boasted to him about having eaten human flesh, though these claims were never verified. Whether or not such specific stories were true, they were widely believed by a terrorized populace. The nickname Butcher of Uganda attached itself to Idi Amin internationally, reflecting the world's revulsion at the atrocities attributed to his rule. As one Ugandan official later said of Amin, "He kills rationally and coolly, hiding a calculating murderer behind a clownish public facade." On the international stage, Amin's Uganda quickly became isolated and notorious. In the early years of his presidency, Idi Amin shifted geopolitical allegiances in dramatic fashion. Initially, he had cooperated with Western powers and Israel. Indeed, Israel had been a key supporter of Uganda's military and reportedly even assisted Amin's 1971 coup. But after consolidating power, Amin pivoted toward the radical Arab and Eastern Bloc states. A Muslim himself, though Uganda's population was predominantly Christian, Amin cut diplomatic ties with Israel in 1972 and denounced the Israeli presence in Africa. Instead, he cultivated friendships with Libya's leader Muammar Gaddafi and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Gaddafi provided financial aid and military support to Amin's regime, bolstering his confidence on the world stage. Amin also received backing, or at least sympathy, from other anti-Western regimes, including the Soviet Union, East Germany, and neighboring Zaire under Mobutu Sese Seko. In 1975, in a startling turn of events, Idi Amin became the chairman of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, a rotating position that made him the titular head of Africa's intergovernmental body for 1 year. This nominal honor was controversial. Many African leaders privately disdained Amin's brutality, but they stuck to the OAU's principle of non-interference. Amin reveled in the prestige, using the platform to grandstand and berate former colonial powers. Amin's relations with Western nations deteriorated rapidly as reports of his human rights abuses and erratic behavior spread. He frequently delivered insults and outrageous remarks directed at Western leaders. Britain, the former colonial ruler of Uganda, became a particular target of Amin's ire. He mocked the British monarchy and at one point awarded himself a medal titled CBE, jokingly meaning Conqueror of the British Empire, after the UK broke off diplomatic relations in 1977. Amin even wrote a telegram to Queen Elizabeth II, congratulating her on England's loss of Northern Ireland and signing himself as His Excellency Field Marshal Idi Amin, VC, DSO, MC, CBE, adding the self-granted CBE to poke fun. The United States also condemned Amin's regime. Amin responded with characteristic bravado, calling American officials imperialists and accusing them of meddling. Perhaps the most infamous international incident involving Amin was the Entebbe hijacking of 1976. When Palestinian and German militants hijacked an Air France flight and landed it at Entebbe airport, Amin personally welcomed the hijackers and supported their demands, turning the incident into an international standoff. The crisis ended when Israeli commandos carried out a dramatic raid to free the hostages, Operation Entebbe, an event that left Amin humiliated on the world stage. His complicity in the hijacking further cemented his image as a rogue leader. By the late 1970s, Uganda was virtually a pariah state. International aid had dried up, foreign investors had fled, and even regional neighbors were openly hostile to Amin's Uganda. A notable exception to Amin's list of enemies was the Arab Gulf state of Saudi Arabia, which, due to Islamic solidarity, maintained quiet ties with him. Saudi Arabia would later play a role in Amin's final exile, but among African neighbors, Tanzania under President Julius Nyerere stood out as Amin's most ardent foe. Nyerere had given refuge to Milton Obote and other Ugandans fleeing Amin's terror, and Amin in turn accused Tanzania of subversion. Relations between the two countries were tense throughout the 1970s, setting the stage for the conflict that would eventually topple Idi Amin from power. In late 1978, Idi Amin's regime was wobbling under the weight of economic collapse and internal dissent. Sensing both weakness at home and external threat from Tanzania, Amin embarked on a foolhardy military adventure. In October 1978, he ordered his army to invade Tanzania, claiming a portion of Tanzanian territory for Uganda. Amin's forces crossed the border and seized a small area of Kagera, looting and brutalizing local civilians. This act of aggression proved to be a fatal miscalculation. Tanzanian President Julius Nyerere responded by declaring war on Uganda and mobilizing the Tanzanian People's Defense Force. Nyerere also rallied Ugandan exiles into a joint fighting force. In a matter of months, the Tanzanian-led counteroffensive smashed through the Ugandan army. By early 1979, Amin's soldiers were in full retreat as Tanzanian units advanced northward. Despite some assistance from Libya, the Ugandan military crumbled in the face of the much larger invasion force. Town after town fell, and Ugandans, long terrorized by Amin, often welcomed the liberating forces. In April 1979, the endgame arrived. Tanzanian troops and Ugandan rebel fighters captured Kampala on April 11, 1979, sending Amin's government into collapse. Idi Amin himself narrowly escaped the capital as it fell. With his remaining loyal soldiers, family members and close aides, he hurriedly fled Uganda. Amin first flew to Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi offered him asylum and support. However, his welcome in Tripoli was short-lived. Even Gaddafi found Amin's presence burdensome due to diplomatic pressure. Amin then took refuge in Iraq for a brief period, and finally he settled in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi royal government allowed Amin to live in Jeddah on the condition that he remain out of politics. Back in Uganda, Amin's overthrow marked the end of 8 horrifying years. A provisional government was installed with Tanzanian backing, and the long task of rebuilding Uganda began. Idi Amin lived the rest of his life in distant exile. In Saudi Arabia, he lived quietly with his 4 wives and many children, reportedly subsisting on a generous stipend. He never faced trial or official accountability for his crimes. Over the years, occasional rumors surfaced of Amin's declining health. Finally, on 16th August 2003, Idi Amin died in a hospital in Jeddah, reportedly of kidney failure at around 78 years of age. He was buried in Saudi Arabia, far from the country he had once ruled with an iron fist. Amin's legacy in Uganda and the world is one of infamy and caution. In Uganda, the mere mention of his name still conjures memories of fear, trauma, and national collapse. His reign left the country's economy shattered and its population decimated by violence. Years of turmoil followed his ouster, but eventually Uganda began to stabilize under new leadership in the 1980s. To this day, Ugandans reflect on the Amin era as a dark chapter that must never be repeated. Globally, Idi Amin is remembered as one of the 20th century's most brutal dictators, often ranked alongside Pol Pot or Augusto Pinochet. The moniker Butcher of Uganda has endured in historical accounts. His life and rule have been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films, most notably the acclaimed film The Last King of Scotland. Yet beyond the lurid anecdotes and bizarre propaganda lies a stark lesson in tyranny. Amin's rise from a junior military officer to an all-powerful despot illustrates the dangers of unchecked power and ethnically charged politics. As a figure in history, Amin's story stands as a grim reminder of how a charismatic populist can turn into a tyrant who brutalizes his own nation. Uganda and the world still remember the rise and fall of Idi Amin as a saga of ruthless ambition, horrific abuse, and ultimate justice dealt by those he oppressed.
Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Kindly subscribe for more.